The rain was falling hard that night, thick sheets that blurred the empty road and turned every puddle into silver glass. Daniel Carter gripped the steering wheel and leaned forward, squinting through the wipers. It was almost midnight, and all he wanted was to get home to his girls. They'd be asleep by now, two little heads on matching pillows, breathing softly in the house that always felt too quiet since their mother passed. As he slowed for the intersection, he saw her. An old woman sat alone at the bus stop, her wheelchair pushed close to the shelter as rain pounded against the roof. She was soaked through, a thin coat clinging to her shoulders, her head bowed like she was too tired to care. Daniel's first thought was to keep driving. He had his daughters at home, and it wasn't safe picking up strangers at midnight. But something about her stopped him. Maybe it was the way her hands trembled, or the way she looked like she'd been forgotten by the world. He pulled over and rolled down the window. "Ma'am, the buses stopped hours ago," he called gently. The woman lifted her face. Her hair was gray and plastered to her cheeks, and her eyes looked lost, like someone who hadn't been spoken to in days. "I'm fine," she said, barely above the sound of the rain. "Just waiting." Daniel got out, pulling his jacket tight around him. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said quietly. "It's freezing out here. Do you have anywhere to go?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No one to call," she whispered. Nowhere to be. Something twisted deep inside Daniel's chest. He knew that feeling. He'd sat in that darkness himself after his wife died. He looked at the soaked figure in front of him and made a decision. "I have 2 daughters," he said softly. "We've got a warm house and an extra room. Why don't you come with me just for tonight?" Her lips trembled. "I don't want to be a burden." "You wouldn't be," he said simply. "Please." It took a moment, but finally she nodded. Her name was Eleanor Hayes. She was 70, and her voice carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who'd been tired for a long time. Daniel loaded her wheelchair into the truck and helped her inside. She barely spoke during the drive, staring out the window as rain streaked across the glass. When they pulled into his driveway, Daniel turned off the engine. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "I mean it." Inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around them. The living room was scattered with toys and coloring books, the kind of mess that comes from raising children alone. Eleanor looked around as if she'd stepped into another world. "You have a beautiful home," she said softly. "It's not fancy," Daniel replied, "but it's ours." He showed her the guest room, the one that used to belong to his wife's mother when she was alive. As he handed her a towel and a blanket, she whispered, "Thank you, Daniel. You didn't have to stop tonight." "Maybe I did," he said quietly. The next morning, Eleanor was already awake when Daniel came downstairs. She sat by the kitchen window, her eyes following the sunrise. "I was going to leave before you woke up," she said, "but I didn't want to go without saying goodbye." "You can stay for breakfast," Daniel smiled. "My girls make better pancakes than I do." Just then, the sound of feet thudding on the stairs filled the air. 2 9-year-old girls burst into the kitchen, laughing and talking over each other. "Dad, who's this?" one of them asked. "This is Mrs. Hayes," Daniel said. "She's our guest." Eleanor looked nervous, but the girls, Emma and Lucy, welcomed her without hesitation. They pulled out a chair for her and started talking like they'd known her forever. During breakfast, Lucy spilled syrup on her pajama sleeve, and Eleanor reached over with a napkin to help. The small gesture made Daniel smile. It was such a natural, motherly thing to do. By the time breakfast was over, Eleanor was laughing softly at the girls' stories. The sadness in her eyes had lifted just a little. Over the next few days, Eleanor became part of the household. She helped the girls with homework, told stories about her life working at a local library, and listened when Daniel talked about his late wife. There was something healing in her presence, quiet but strong. One afternoon, as Daniel was fixing a leaky faucet, Eleanor sat nearby folding laundry. Out of nowhere, she said, "My husband, Richard, used to fix everything himself. He was a good man." Her voice trembled. "We were married 40 years. He died in a car accident 10 years ago. I was with him. And I survived. Daniel looked up, sensing the pain behind her words. That must have been hard, she nodded. I thought my life ended that night. I lost him, my health, my home, everything. I had no children, no one left. I've been alone ever since. Daniel wanted to tell her he understood, that he knew what it was like to lose someone and still have to keep living. But instead he just said, "You're not alone anymore." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Thank you, Daniel. You and your girls. You've given me something I thought I'd lost for good." Months passed. The girls adored Eleanor. She became their Grandma Ellie, the one who helped with school projects and told bedtime stories. Daniel found himself relying on her more than he expected. She made the house feel alive again. Then one morning a thick envelope arrived in the mail addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. The return address read, Henderson and Lee Law Offices. Daniel handed it to her. "Looks official," he said lightly. Eleanor opened it slowly, her hands shaking. Inside was a formal letter. As she read, her eyes widened. "Mrs. Hayes," Daniel asked. "What is it?" Tears filled her eyes. "It says I'm the majority shareholder of Hayes and Dalton Group," she whispered. "That's my husband's old company. I thought he sold his shares years before he died. I had no idea he left them in my name." Daniel blinked in disbelief. "You mean you own part of one of the biggest firms in the country?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "I guess I do. They've been trying to find me for years. They thought I passed away after the accident." The house went quiet. That night Eleanor sat alone at the kitchen table, the letter in her lap. For 10 years she had lived modestly, barely getting by, never realizing she was wealthy beyond measure. But all that money meant nothing compared to what she'd found in that little house with Daniel and his girls. When Daniel joined her, she looked up. "What do I do with all this?" "Whatever feels right," he said softly. She smiled sadly. "Maybe I finally know what right looks like." Within a few months, Eleanor met with the lawyers and confirmed everything. She was officially the owner of half the company her husband had built. The fortune was more than she could ever spend. But instead of moving into a mansion or buying a new car, she stayed right where she was. She quietly paid off Daniel's mortgage and set up college funds for Emma and Lucy. She also donated a large portion of her inheritance to build a community center in town, a safe place for single parents, children, and anyone who felt alone. She named it the Richard and Margaret Center, after both her late husband and Daniel's late wife. When Daniel found out what she'd done, he was speechless. "You didn't have to do any of this," he said, his voice thick. Eleanor smiled. "Yes, I did. Richard left me that money to take care of people. I just didn't know who until now." Years passed and the Carter home was filled with laughter again. The girls grew up strong and kind, carrying pieces of both their mother and their Grandma Ellie in their hearts. The community center became a symbol of hope in town, helping hundreds of families rebuild their lives. On a quiet evening, 9 years after that rainy night, Daniel and Eleanor sat on the porch watching the sunset. The girls were away at college and the air smelled of autumn leaves. "Do you ever think about that night at the bus stop?" Daniel asked. Eleanor nodded, her voice gentle. "Every day. I thought my story was over. I was ready to disappear." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe that's when it started." Eleanor looked out at the fading light. "Richard used to say life has a strange way of giving us what we need, just not how we expect it. I think he was right. I thought I lost everything that night, but I found a new family, a new reason to live." She reached over and patted Daniel's hand. "The money, the company, all of that was just paper. What I found here with you and the girls, that's real wealth." The porch fell quiet except for the soft hum of crickets. The house behind them glowed with the warm light of home, filled with memories of laughter, love, and second chances. Eleanor smiled to herself. She wasn't waiting for the end anymore. She was living, right in the middle of a story that had turned out far more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. Because sometimes, when we stop to help a stranger, we don't just save their life. We find our own.